So good. Welcome back, everybody. We've got another face reading video, and today I'm going to be doing Aaron Hernandez. So, that Netflix special is currently out right now, so I figured I would do his face given what I just watched about the documentary. It's a pretty sad story, obviously. A young guy who ended up being a convicted murderer, was a professional football player, had everything, the world was his oyster essentially. But in any case, for those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Gray Estrada. I'm a Chinese medicine lifestylist, so I facilitate the lifestyle aspects of Chinese medicine for my clients, one of which is face reading as the basic entry to work with me. By reading the face, which is a classical branch of Chinese medicine, I then build out lifestyle guidance around what your face looks like. So in Chinese medicine, what your face looks like points to personality traits, aptitudes, what your environment should look like. So I facilitate movement arts for people, teach them about seasonal eating, what their external environment should look like based off of the elemental breakdown in their face, meditative strategy. There's a lot of different things I do. But in the context of this, I always like to give the basic disclaimer about face reading is that face reading is not an exact science. It's not psychic fortune telling. What I do is look at the baseline features and then from there look at the personality traits that should go with that. So Chinese medicine was very good at documenting facial recognition patterns over thousands of years, and they just started to see patterns. And that's what this is about, is recognizing patterns and finding what features line up. So again, this is not psychic fortune telling. I don't want you guys to think of it like that. As I go through this and talk about Chinese medicine terms, I will define them as I go along. So that's just sort of the nature of these videos. If it gets repetitive for people that are watching, just think of it as repetition that you'll learn and you'll absorb more. So in any case, let's talk about Aaron Hernandez. So the first thing that I do when I'm reading people's faces is talk about Jing, Qi, and Shen. Now, Jing, Qi, and Shen are what they call the three treasures in Chinese medicine. Your Jing is your material essence, your genetic constitution, what you came into the world with, what you inherited. It also relates to our sexual vitality and sexual fluids in the body. Then we've got Qi, which is, a sensationalized word nowadays, but what that really boils down to in classical meaning is our bioelectricity. Our central nervous system is electrical. We are mostly water. So through lifestyle and through practices, we can augment this energy. But the basic idea is when I look at the Qi level or the energy, the daily energy level of a person, I'll be looking at colorations on the face and whatnot. And then Shen is the consciousness, the anima or the spirit or personality of a person that can't really be measured but is felt. So when we look at Aaron Hernandez, one of the first things that I noticed about him was very strong Jing. This is very common in people who are highly athletic, people that have strong physical bodies. Now with Jing, one of the things we're going to notice is that he's got a really sizable, strong bone structure. There's nothing frail about his face. It's very fleshy, it's very strong. He's got heavy bones, it looks like. He's also got when we look at his face and we look at his features, okay, he also has some of the darkest, thickest hair I've ever seen on his head. And this is indicative of Jing. So what this looks like in Chinese medicine is that when someone has really strong Jing, it means their genetic blueprint has a lot of structural integrity. They can be pretty hard on their bodies usually, and they can live a long time if they don't end up beating the shit out of their bodies as they go along. But people with a lot of Jing usually do end up beating up their bodies, and they're pretty hard on it because they're very resilient. So there's kind of a catch-22 there. But that thick, dark, jet black, helmet-looking hair that he's got on his head is a sign of good Jing. Also a sign of what they would call kidney energetics. So in Chinese medicine, the kidneys, your constitutional essence, your Jing, those concepts and those ideas and those rhythms are closely related. So with Aaron Hernandez, that jet black hair, that really thick, dense hair, is a sign of strong constitutional genetics. So people that have very thick, dark black hair just fundamentally usually have a lot of Jing. So that's one of the first things I noticed when I looked at him. And his overall Qi, okay, so when we look at the health of his organs, what he has to a degree, okay, the Qi when he was still alive, okay, the Qi of his face, the vital energy, wasn't as robust as I would like to see in someone his age. So He's young. He was young. I can't remember how old he was when he ended up taking his own life, but he was young. I think he was still in his maybe late 20s. I don't think he had broken 30 yet. I could be wrong. I can't remember from the documentary. But overall, his face looks a little more pale than I would like given his constitution. Now, when you look at him, he's not ghost white by any means. He doesn't look like he is, very sick. We're talking subtleties here. Okay, so he was, at his age, he was very young and very vibrant and very strong. But his face lacks a little bit of what you would call that rosiness or that complexion that is actually vibrant and has light behind it. His face looks a little sallow. It looks a little less bright than I would like given his age. Now, this can be a few different things, okay? Blood deficiency, which is where a person is thinking too much. The thinking mind will actually consume the energy of the blood, and then we get this sallow complexion. So if I get overworked and I'm working too much or thinking too much, my coloring suffers a little bit, and most people do. But it looks like consistently throughout his pictures that he's got a little bit of this going on, and it sounds like from watching the documentary of what he had going on in his mind was pretty active and pretty heavy. So now his Shen, when we look at the Shen, that's the anima or the spirit that's felt, or the personality that sort of emits from the face, the feeling that we get. And when I look at Aaron Hernandez, the Shen always made me a little nervous. And the feeling that comes out of his face is not one that is welcoming or that I would feel comfortable around. So when I saw, when the news broke years back and I heard about this story and I watched him do his thing and I heard about, the potential that he was a murder suspect and that he may have killed, a number of people. When I looked at his face, my first gut reaction was, yeah, this is not looking good for him, and his face makes me a little uneasy. Something about it always didn't read quite right. So his Shen does not emit, for me, it never has. It never looks trustworthy and someone that I would leave my kid with in an emergency. He's not one of those people. So we're all going to read faces a little differently, but my internal sense is the Shen I don't fully trust. From the get-go, I had never heard about him because I don't follow football hardly at all. But when I saw his picture, I thought, ooh, I don't get a good feeling from his face. So that's a basic breakdown, okay, of the Jing, Qi, and Shen. And backtracking just a little bit, going back to the Jing, when you look at his ears, okay, now, mind you, I can't touch his ears, but tensile strength of the ears is indicative of strong Jing or strong constitutional kidney, genetics. That's one of the things we're looking at. So the softer the ear, if you can fold the ear and the ear is very soft and it's very pliable, this means constitutional genetics usually aren't as strong as they could be. His ears look very thick, and this would make a lot of sense given his career choice, which was football. His body's just taking a beating. So people with strong Jing usually can do those kinds of things, like I said before. But the size of his ears, which is related to risk-taking in Chinese face reading, the size of his ears are I would say they're medium large on his head size. So he's got pretty big ears, which means he was prone to, good Lord. He's prone to constitutional strength in the kidneys. But what that means, those ear size, is that it means we're looking at risk-taking behavior. Okay, that's a piece for sure. So in my last video, if you have not watched it, go watch Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I talk about ear size, and I reference an MMA fighter, Alex Honnold. People that are involved in risky behavior usually have larger ears. So his ears are on the larger side, which means, yeah, definitely like risk, prone to risk. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something to notice in his personality. Now, when we look at Aaron Hernandez and we look at his face, there's something in Chinese medicine in the context of face reading called the mountain and rivers. So again, I'm going to give orientation to this in every video, you guys. So some of this you may hear again, but the basic idea is this. The rivers of the face are the areas that contain moisture. The eyes, the nostrils, the mouth, and the ears. The areas that are wet or that can be moist. These are the rivers. Now, the mountains are the bony protrusions, okay? So we're looking at the forehead, the cheekbones, the nose, which is the biggest mountain, the part of the chin, which technically has relationship to water as well, but technically this is still one of the mountains, and the jaw. So the bony areas are the mountains and rivers. When we look at the mountain and rivers of a person, looking at through the mountain and rivers lens, what that points to usually is you can look at it in terms of the geography a person is most ideally suited for. So someone like me with larger water features, I have big eyes, I have big nostrils, I have pretty big ears. This means ideally I would live around large bodies of water. The smaller the eyes, the smaller the water features in this context through this lens means that smaller bodies of water, smaller mountains if you have, really soft bones. So when we look at his face, his eyes are medium sized. He doesn't have huge nostrils. He doesn't have a huge mouth. His water features were on the smaller side, which means he wouldn't necessarily need a ton of water in his environment. He would need some, but we all need some because we're 80% water. So looking at his face, that there's not a draw where he would have to be in the Pacific Islands, or he'd have to be somewhere like that. His face runs more towards moderate water, so he could live in a place with a single river, that kind of a thing. Now, when we look at the mountains on his face, he's got a pretty strong nose. So, had he lived, his nose probably would have served him well in his 40s, because the nose is the entirety of the nose is regulated by our 40s. So when you look at someone's nose and it's prominent and dominant, that usually means they're going to have prosperous 40s, as long as the other features on the face don't take that out. So in looking at him, what I'm seeing is that he's got a pretty strong chin, he's got a pretty strong jawline, and he's got, not really dominant cheekbones, but they're commensurate and proportional to the rest of his bones. And he's got definitely a very strong brow bone. So if you look at that angle of that brow bone, in Chinese medicine, they say this is actually kind of aligned with Jing, or testosterone, in men. So, that the deeper the more sunken in it is here, with that protruding kind of Cro-Magnon look that people can get. These are people usually they don't like to be told what to do either. They like to be in charge. They like to be pushing. So in the context of Aaron Hernandez, he's got some pretty sizable mountains. So he would have been geared for living in sort of mountain terrain with moderate water. So and we're not talking huge mountains, not like the Himalayas, but somewhere, I would say lower elevation mountains with moderate water would have been sort of an ideal place for him to live. Now, moving on, we look at the prominent features, okay? We look at prominent features on a face. As a face reader, what I'm looking for are the things that leap out to me right away, the things that I think, wow, like that, there's something there. The first one is his hairline, which is, I would say, on statistically, considerably lower than the average person. So if you look at where, my hairline is, now mind you, my hair has receded over the years. It's actually good luck in Chinese medicine, according to that theory, which is all the guys out there, if you're like, oh, I'm receding, just realize that in Chinese medicine, that's cool shit. And I'll go into that later. But if you look at it, like it would be the equivalent of my hairline being right here. I mean, it's very low. And the hairline is interesting in the context of face reading. So one of the things we're looking at here is that the hairline has a lot to do with, and the height of the hairline has to do with the mind. Now, when we look at Aaron Hernandez, okay, traditionally, like by the book, when you look at this, a hairline like this, when it's low on the forehead, means usually a repressive childhood. So people with lower hairlines usually have sort of these childhoods that are more repressed, more emotional turmoil. Again, it's not always like this, you guys. This is not an exact science. But what they saw over thousands of years, where people with lower foreheads seem to attract or gravitate towards childhoods that were a little rougher, a little more emotionally repressed, a little bit where things were pushed down. And the hairline also has relationship to the mother's influence. And what that means is low hairlines like this, by the book, means that repressive childhood, emotionally difficult in the childhood, and the mother's influence was likely oppressive and a little bit overbearing. Now, it doesn't always have to be the mother. There can be definitely a father, or if you were adopted and, or if you live with a grandparent, it's the person that's going to be socializing you the most. But traditionally, right, this is kind of where they would see that this energy comes from the mother. So his forehead, in the context of Chinese face reading, says repressed childhood, likely difficult, and that low means that there was sort of almost an overbearing quality to the mom. Now, what's interesting about that is that when you watch the documentary, if you have it on Netflix, about his whole story and how this went down and the murders and everything, he had a very strained relationship with his mom. And there's even audio recordings of him talking and saying, you just did all these terrible things to me, and you moved on right after, my dad died, and you just weren't supportive to me. And, he's got like serious problems with his mom. And it's interesting to note to see this, that, the theory sort of holds true. So his hairline definitely stands out to me. And the other interesting point about the hairline too is that the height of the hairline has to do with the expansion, the wide-ranging capacity of the mind. So higher hairline means more expansive thinking processes, usually a wider, more open mind, and also assessing risk in situations. They're sort of like, how well can you feel into a situation and make decisions? Lower hairline people, what I've seen consistently, is they're usually a little more impulsive. And this was very true with Aaron Hernandez, very reactive, and had that low hairline, which didn't think things through fully. And if you watch this, how he was caught, being videotaped with a gun, walking back into his house, he was not thinking ahead. Now, an interesting side note to this, obviously, if you watch the documentary, they talk about the CTE, which is the brain injury that comes from high contact sports. And it looks like Aaron Hernandez definitely had some serious brain injury. And what they were saying is that, the things that were happening to him, what he had been through, very much aligned with making him more impulsive, more aggressive. So people have said, well, it's because of the football, but there's a lot of football players who get head injuries who don't end up killing people after the fact. I think it's always the case where you have to have some of that innate aggressiveness inside of you, and then it can be exacerbated and made worse by an injury. And I think that's what happened with Aaron Hernandez. I think his face naturally shows some natural aggressive tendencies, and then you add an injury on top of that, and that's the perfect storm, which isn't great, but it's kind of the way it went. So in terms of dominant features, his hairline is very strong, and he's also got pretty penetrating eyes. And they're not particularly huge, but the things that I noticed were eyebrows, eyes, and forehead, like this area really, up top, and all of which make me a little nervous. These features together would not make me, like I said, not someone I would probably want to hang out with. And it's just something to consider when we're looking at this, because you have to go by feeling too, because that's what most of us do when we read faces. We go off of the instinctual feeling that we feel off of a face. And for me, not so great with Aaron Hernandez. So, he's got a strong nose, like I said, but those are the most dominant features. Everything else I could go into, but those were the big ones that stood out. So now we're going to look at his interpersonal nature and public persona. Now, when we look at this picture that I'm putting up here, the picture on the left is his public persona. The picture on the right is his interpersonal nature. And the basic orientation of this, you guys, so you're not like, it's just not me making arbitrary statements. Chinese medicine stipulated that the right side of the body and the left side of the body have polarities. This all ties back to yin-yang theory. Alpha and omega, birth and death, hard and soft, male and female. There's polarities in life, and so the left and right sides of the body have different correlations, different associations. And over thousands of years, what they noticed was that the right side of the face seemed to capture the public persona. This is the face that we show at a job interview, on a first date, when we first meet someone, but sort of the character we play in life. The left side was more aligned with your interpersonal nature. And so one of the things they do in face reading is that you look at a person's face when you're talking to them, and if you tune into their left side, their left, not your left, but their left, and you turn into their right side. When you turn into the left, you're reading the interpersonal nature of the person, and when you tune into the right, you're reading their public persona. And this is one of the ways that you can sort of break down and assess and feel people more deeply upon meeting them. So in this context, okay, like I said, the picture on the left, that is his public persona. The picture on the right is his interpersonal nature. And so the basic idea when you look at someone's face like this, the idea is you want to look at these two pictures and you want to see, like, how do I feel about him? Would I sit down and have a cup of tea or drink a beer with this person? Would I feel comfortable in their presence? And for me personally, looking at both of these, not so much. Neither one of these make me feel at ease. And again, you have to just go by how you feel. But some people might be like, neither one bothers me, But for me, being a face reader and kind of, to the best of my abilities, understanding features in the context of Chinese medicine, neither one of these make me feel great. So the one on the left, his public persona, definitely for me has a sense of apathy, sort of an apathetic penetration in the gaze. There's a kind of an indifference to the look on his face, and it was hard to find a picture of him straight on without an expression. This is as good as it can get. So it's slightly augmented because of the expression, but the feeling I get is that, the features are a little bit more broad, but there's a penetrating gaze that I don't like about it. It makes me uncomfortable. Now, when we look at his interpersonal nature, we see his eyes are considerably more close set, and the jaw is actually wider, which means on the left side of his face, his jaw was actually wider. The jaw is associated with liver energetics, and what this ties to is strong will, determination, grit, and driving power. And when the eyes are closer set together, like they are in his interpersonal nature, this is more of a hypercritical nature. It's sort of like someone being very detail oriented and being very critical and just really honing in on things and people and, badgering people. They can be hypercritical. My face actually runs like this a little bit. My left side, my eye is closer. So my interpersonal nature definitely can be critical. And people that know me well, definitely, like I can be prone to being judgmental in weird contexts and sort of hypercritical about things. And I've had to learn to really ease up on that as I've gotten older. It's a work in progress. It's not all there. But his face is like this. And when you see his face, he's sort of bottom heavy. So in the interpersonal nature, okay, on the right side here, the right picture, he's got a wider jaw. He's sort of jowly. Everything down here is fuller and bigger with close set eyes. And what this kind of translates in face reading is hypercritical focus, judgmental, sort of a penetrating, just forthright gaze with really strong determination and big liver energetics. The liver also regulates your temper and your anger and how you express that. So this shows a hypercritical person with prone to very strong wood energetics, which isn't, again, not the best combination. When we break down these sectors in the face, the upper portion relates to heaven, or like, consciousness and higher thought processes. The middle part of our face here relates to what we would call the earth spectrum, which is sort of the pragmatism. And then the bottom part, from like the nose down, is the emotional and instinctual aspects of our thinking and of our personality rhythms. So his interpersonal nature is bottom heavy, which means emotional and instinctual, with a narrower sort of, the pragmatism here isn't real big. And then his hairline is also higher thinking, isn't real big either. So this doesn't mean if you have a low hairline that you're dumb. That's not what I'm saying. It doesn't mean you're an idiot or anything like that. What it means is the thought processes don't get as rangy as they could. So you mix these all together. When we look at Aaron Hernandez's life and how it went, some of these things hold true. Not the best combinations, okay? Now, when we look at, just real quickly, I'm going to go through the 5 elements on him. The 5 elements: fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. These are 5 phases or rhythms in nature that the Chinese saw were around us, that we were living off of. And because of that, because man is connected to nature, these rhythms are inside of us. So Aaron Hernandez, the most prominent features that I see in him, the most prominent elements, I would say, are wood, because of the strong jawline, really dominant eyebrows, and he's got a pretty sizable amount of metal too. There's some squareness to his features, but he's also got a decent amount of fire given the intensity of his gaze. And so when someone has an intense gaze, it's definitely a fire element. I could touch on earth and on water, but he doesn't have a ton of those. His mouth is relatively full, which is an earth feature, but where he's strongest is wood and metal. And that's not necessarily good or bad. You have to read the features in the context of that lens. But with strong wood, okay, which is like a temper, definitely can be prone to volatility. And then metal and wood have a destructive cycle. Metal destroys wood in the 5 element cycle. That's not inherently bad. But when I look at his features, he's got a mixture of these two things. And it's almost like 2 elements in conflict a little bit. Lots of wood, lots of metal. And that's not always a good thing. If he had softer eyes and, a different hairline, it might be different. But those are the predominant elements that I see in his face. And, if obviously you guys, looking to facilitating lifestyle guidance, that's what I do for a living. I read people's faces in the context of Chinese medicine and I give them suggestions. So when I look at Aaron Hernandez's face, the lifestyle guidance that I would have given him, had he not gone down this road. The first thing would have been on my radar. Most definitely, I would have probed and asked about his childhood, given the size of his forehead. And if I had probed and gotten into that and asked, connected with him, I would have strongly encouraged him to get into some kind of, marriage and family therapy, that kind of thing, or something that specializes in childhood trauma, and working out the issues to actually unearth the emotions. Because with a profile like this and a face like this with a strong jaw, really heavy features, dark features, this is not someone that you want to be sitting on their emotions. It's not good for any of us, but especially when your features run like this and you have a lot of wood and maybe prone to aggression. So I would have encouraged that. I also, in the meditative spectrum, would have encouraged him to get into some kind of mindfulness practice like meditation. Now, he's an athlete, and with that low brow, getting this mind to expand might have been difficult for him. So he might have been a prime candidate for walking meditation, or something like binaural beats, something like holosync, where he had auditory, where he could still be stimulated, but didn't have to get that mind to relax and open given the size of his forehead. So I would have given him meditation techniques that were more on the active side as opposed to someone who sits silently, in the full lotus. Some people are more inclined to that. He's not one of them. I would have given him an active meditation or staring at a candle, what I call fire gazing. That's one of the techniques I share with my clients. So in terms of diet, he didn't have any overt marks. He's got a little bit of indentation here, which means that the diet sometimes can be out of whack, but it's hard to say. He was so young. It doesn't look like his diet needed a ton of work, or his body was just at a place in his jing and his constitution was so strong he didn't really need to focus on it that much. Now, outside of these things, the main takeaway that I would say with his lifestyle guidance is that he would have needed to have been in an environment, externally, that was conducive to emotional expression. So part of what I do with people when I look at their faces is saying, okay, you've got these features. So the feng shui in his environments, right, the external shaping that helps support our psychology, I would have said for Aaron Hernandez that he definitely needs water. He needs depth. He needs flow. Because with a face like this and that low brow, he would have needed that depth to go in and swim in his emotional spectrum and then get into a place and unearth the stuff that was dark, that he didn't like. Pretty sad story. His dad died really young. His mom didn't show up the way he wanted. And you repress all that emotionality on a face like this, and we kind of see where it went. And again, you guys, this isn't an exact science. This is never like, I can't look at his face and know everything about him, but I'm just looking at his face and sharing the patterns that I've seen in the context of Chinese medicine. So hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have, comments, questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section. Hit that like and subscribe button and the bell notification if you want to be updated to my stuff. And if you would like a face reading done to you, please find me at my website, which is omnihealthandlifestyle.com. And from there, I can work with you just at the context of face reading and leave it at that, or work with clients for a longer period of time to facilitate lifestyle guidance through the lens of Chinese medicine. So thanks so much for your time, you guys. You take care. And if there's someone you'd like me to read, please let me know. Thanks.